Ladies and gentlemen, we have finally made it. The release of Starfield is here. Unless, of course, you paid for the early access version of the game, then you've been able to play it for about a week. And already the discourse around Starfield is starting to reach insane levels. It is a game that is being nitpicked into oblivion, and while some of the criticism is fair, seems to mostly come from people that are just wanting to find things wrong about the game. Like the guy that complained that you couldn't land on a gas giant that's in our solar system, and said that, aha, see, you can't travel to every planet. Bethesda lied, this game is terrible. But on the other hand, I'm seeing some people who love Starfield and that lavish over the game and what Bethesda has done, which I agree a lot with, but most people also ignore a lot of the problems the game has. At the time of recording this video, I'm about 40 hours deep and haven't even scratched the surface of some of the major faction storylines, which can take hours themselves to complete. I think at the heart of the Starfield discussion, everyone is wrong about Starfield. Specifically, I believe many tried to make the game something that it was not and are judging it based on their own personal expectations rather than what it is, a Bethesda RPG set in space. We saw this just a few years ago with Cyberpunk 2077. Cyberpunk had a horrible launch and lacked a lot of content people expected to be in the game. There was no customization for vehicles, the police system was an absolute joke, lots of buildings were inaccessible, there was no monorail system, and yes, there were people that were upset about that. Tons of bugs, and many more. It was universally agreed that perhaps Cyberpunk might have been better if it had sat in the oven a little longer. But here we are now, just a few short years later, and with the Phantom Liberty expansion on the horizon, all seems to be forgiven. I just remember a lot of the negative feedback about Cyberpunk, again, being about it not being the game people expected it to be. People already had a preconceived notion in their minds that what type of game Cyberpunk was, and when the game did not meet their expectations, they bashed the game. I fully believe that this is where the discourse surrounding Starfield is coming from. Many came into this game expecting a super expansive space simulation / exploration game with unlimited possibilities. That is not the type of game Starfield is, nor is that the type of studio that Bethesda is. The only game that claims to be exactly that is Star Citizen, but that game feels like it's more about raising money and building ships that its player base has to buy with real-world money, while also making outlandish promises that may never be realized. Companies like Bethesda have to streamline their thought process. If they tried to include everything into Starfield that everyone wanted, then the game would never be finished and never be in a releasable state. Starfield falls in line with every other Bethesda RPG made to date. The story, not necessarily the environment, is the focus of the game. That's not to say the environment doesn't matter, because Bethesda has done an excellent job, and in my opinion is one of the best, with telling a story by just placing things in an environment with no real narrative around them. You could walk into a room in either an Elder Scrolls game, a Fallout game, or even here in Starfield and gain an idea of some tragedy that happened just by the assets that are sitting around you. But what makes Bethesda games memorable are the quests, characters, factions, and stories that are told within those environments. Starfield is a Bethesda RPG that just so happens to take place in space. This is not like Star Citizen or No Man's Sky in terms of what those games were trying to accomplish. It's better to compare Starfield to something like Mass Effect, a story-driven game that takes place in space, but also happens to have lots more exploration, customization, and story elements than what Mass Effect has. If there was a middle ground between Mass Effect and No Man's Sky, Starfield probably lies somewhere in there, just more towards the Mass Effect side. No Man's Sky has added some story as time has gone on, but not to the level of a Bethesda game. Star Citizen is more like an MMO, and I saw someone talking about how Star Citizen is still the superior game to Starfield because it has both space exploration and a single player story in Squadron 42, but as far as I know, Squadron 42 has not released yet, and when's the last time that anyone's heard an update about Squadron 42? And this is just me personally, vast empty space to just randomly explore with no real story to go to just seems boring. It's why I can only do No Man's Sky in little increments at a time. And I think Starfield has a decent balance of both. There's the emptiness of space and the vast planets for you to explore, but if you get bored with that, then you can just go back to the story and do more quests. Again, it's just a personal preference. I can't remember where I saw this comparison, but someone stated that Starfield was just like the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, but in space. The more I think about it, and the more I play the game, that is probably the most accurate description of this game. The handcrafted parts of Starfield are immaculate, and the storytelling is top tier. However, the randomly generated aspects of the game, outside of the random encounters, which lean more towards the handcrafted that just kind of happen randomly, are pretty repetitive and lackluster. That's also the best way to describe Oblivion. But Oblivion is remembered fondly by those that have played Bethesda games for years because of how memorable the characters and the quests were. I dare any Bethesda fan out there to find a better faction questline, not just in Bethesda games, but any other RPG that can beat or is better than Oblivion's Dark Brotherhood questline. It's hard to tell how well the game will be remembered in a few years down the line, but from everything I've seen, there's a lot working in Starfield's favor. I think once the modding community really gets a hold of the game and starts to pump out some big mods, and when Bethesda starts releasing updates and DLC, then many who dislike the game now will probably come around. Now, I do worry that Bethesda might be leaning a little too much on the modding community when it comes to this game and maybe their future titles, but that's a discussion for another day and one that I would love to dive into at a later date. Personally, all I wanted from this game was a spectacular Bethesda RPG experience, and that's exactly what I got. Now that I understand how outposts work, upgraded some perks, and really delved deeper into the shipbuilding, I'm starting to see the picture that Bethesda is trying to paint. Does Starfield have its problems? Absolutely. But I personally believe there is a lot more good outweighing the bad. If you haven't played Starfield but are familiar with previous Bethesda games, I fully believe that once you give the game some time and come to it with the right mindset of what to expect, then you'll be blown away by what Bethesda has accomplished. If you're not familiar with Bethesda games, again, just remember, the story and the narratives come first. You'll probably spend more time in dialogue than shooting down space pirates. But it's that way on purpose. Bethesda is trying to tell a story, not make an FPS shooter that can compete with Call of Duty. Once you see the vision, it's hard not to appreciate the effort of the developers of Starfield. It's not everyone's cup of tea, and if you love or hate the game, that's totally fine and you're entitled to your own opinion. But I believe the discussions around Starfield, be them positive or negative, will be more constructive and productive if everyone approaches the subject in the correct manner. With all that said, you definitely should go out and play Starfield. As soon as I get done with this video, that's exactly what I plan to do. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video. If you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so that way you can be notified whenever a new video drops. This is Jackson Law from Vendetta Sports Media, signing off, and I will see you guys next time.